My name is Mitch Bettis. I own the Arkansas Business Publishing Group, the state's business magazine, Arkansas Business, and we have an all-star panel to talk about infrastructure. You have a full bio of each of these folks in your program. I hope you take a look at that. There couldn't really be anybody better to have this discussion. The infrastructure needs of Northeast Arkansas are critical as the catalyst for future economic growth, and we're entering one of those once-in-a-generation information cycles, infrastructure cycles. We've got a lot going on, and you have heard about these and read about these in the news. There's a multi-billion-dollar Google data center campus that is in the works for West Memphis. One of the most significant private investments in this state's history. We've already heard about from High Bar and Mississippi County and what has happened there with infrastructure and economic development and the needs that have happened there. We have the new I-55 river crossing, Kings Crossing, that'll continue to strengthen the daily link between Arkansas and Memphis, and the freight hub that moves goods throughout this nation. And these are significant reminders that highways, bridges, electrical infrastructure, water systems, secure digital networks are critical to the ongoing health and the future health of our region. So we're excited to dive in. We got a whole set of questions here to hopefully learn a little more about what's happening. And Commissioner Halsey, we're going to tee you up first, and in particular sort of help us understand what's on the horizon. What specific transportation projects do you see here in the sort of a 5-year, 10-year, 30-year horizon that are going to be critical for Northeast Arkansas and reshape the region in many ways?
Thank you. I'm Jerry Halsey. I'm your commissioner for the 1st Congressional District, and as a commissioner, I'll serve a 10-year term, and I started my term in January. And whenever you look at the goals and regional needs for infrastructure, you look at 5, 10, 30, but I'm going to tell you today that I am hopeful, prayerful that at the end of my term, I'm going to complete a goal or vision that was started back in the 80s. Dalton Farmer put I-57 that he wanted that to be completed, and I want you to think about how I was in the 11th grade when he came on the commission, and I'm going to be over 60 whenever I get to hopefully get to cut a ribbon on I-57. So think about what that takes to actually complete a project and what the needs are. So when you look at a vision and when you look at my goals and other goals, you're looking at goals from previous commissioners, you're looking at goals from the community. So if you look in the short term, in the 5 years, next 5 years, we're going to have approximately $600 million spent in Northeast Arkansas. Part of that is the bypass around Corning and a 4-lane highway going up to the state line. You're looking at probably $50 to $60 million on the bypass, $56 million on the bypass, and another $60 to $75 million going up to the state line. You look at Interstate 555 here in Jonesboro that goes to Wynn on Highway 1. We're going to widen the road from I-55 to Caraway Road, and then we'll go from Caraway Road to Poinsett County. So, and that's in the 5-year plan. You look at a 10-year plan, and we've got the widening of we've got a Pocahontas bypass that we're going to put in to relieve truck traffic, and so you've got $600 million that is going to be spent over the next few years. Now, if you look at a 30-year plan, and you look at and so if you take yourself back to 1980 and you say, what does this community need, and what are we going to work to get? I'm going to tell you that it would be my goal before I leave to get it started, a 4-lane divided highway from Lake City to I-55 just south of Osceola to better access the steel industry. We have to have connectivity, and now is the time to be planning for it because they're building it. And we have got to be ready whenever they go to work. We've got to have the infrastructure in to support that. I'm going to keep going or stop for right now.
Well, You've really teed up everything we're about to talk about here as how long it takes for projects of this size and scope to move from idea to fulfillment, and the vision and the discipline and the fulfillment it takes. So I appreciate you teeing up that reminder that in 11th grade we're seeing, your 11th grade year, we're now seeing projects kind of nearing completion. So. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, okay, Jessie, this sort of leads us right back to ARDOT. So help just set some of that context for us that Jerry sort of alluded to there. Sort of what's the process, this environmental review, design, there's land to buy, there's utilities to move, sort of help us understand what kind of process is in place to sort of get things moving that might take not 5 years, but 25 years and 50 years to complete.
Yes. So talking about planning a project from concept to delivery, it's almost building a highway or building a building or even Entergy's power plant, things like that. You have to start from planning. And then once you have planning, you roughly know what kind of scope, what your needs are before you will actually determine what kind of budget you're going to need to have. And the next thing for us is to try to find funding. Do we have funding for improvements? How do we face it? Infrastructure projects are very expensive today. And so how do we deliver a project, a major project? So once you have funding identified, you will begin environmental study, what we call the National Environmental Protection Act of 1969, that there are many requirements that we have to meet to clear for federal aid projects. So after environmental study, we have design, we have to acquire right-of-way, move utilities before the project will be ready for construction. So projects could take decades before they become fruition.
And help me on the funding question here, because I'm assuming much of that's federal and part of that state, and there may be, I don't know what other resource that would be, but maybe there's something else. How do you predict funding availability 25 years from now, much less 50 years from now?
Well, that's a good question. Currently we operate under the IIJA, which is the latest transportation bill, funds transportation through the end of September of 2026. Now, what can we expect from federal government for funding? It's yet to be seen. I know Congress is drafting some language. They're working hard on that, but the idea is to have a bill in place before the fiscal year starts in 2027. But is that going to happen? It's everybody's, that's an important question to ask. So I can't tell you exactly what that funding is going to look like from federal level. But for sure is we all need additional funding. Even the IIJA level of funding is insufficient, even looking at today's inflation that we're facing. A dollar can no longer can buy what it used to buy. So we have to make sure that the funding can keep up with the needs.
Well, given how functional, smooth, and dependable the federal government is, I don't know why you have questions. That seems crazy to me. So, Laura, the energy infrastructure has, I think, got a heightened degree of attention over in recent years. The governor was at the Rotary Club of Little Rock not long ago and saying something to the effect of, when she was recruiting companies, she formally got the question of, do you have the workforce? Today, that is not even maybe in the top 2 or 3 questions. It is, do you have the energy to really support this project that we might bring to your state? So, how do you evaluate, and again, we also recently heard from the CEO of Southwest Power Pool, who has talked about the rising demand and sort of the flat supply, and we're running into crisis zones here soon. So I'm curious how you view this picture. How do you evaluate capacity versus demand? from existing users, all these new users that are consuming more energy, and sort of how does Entergy Arkansas think about long-term planning with all of those pressures and dynamic situations?
Thanks, Mitch, and thank you all for having me here today. There's a lot to unpack in that question, so I'll try and hit some of the high points there. At a minimum, there's truly not a day that goes by where you don't pick up the newspaper or watch the news and they talk about the fact that, you know, power and utilities and costs are rising and that this has become a national priority. You are seeing an inflection point, so to speak, in the industry. You alluded to that, Mitch, when we talk about the fact that the demand is outpacing the supply. And that is not only in terms of the megawatts or the electrons that supply the power, but it's also in terms of the equipment that is needed to do the infrastructure needed to deliver those electrons. Because of that, you're also seeing and reading about double-digit price increases for the cost of electricity from our friends in the northeast part of the country and the eastern part of the country, because now the demand has outpaced the supply. So you put all that together and it's a recipe for disaster. That is not the case here in Arkansas. We have capacity to serve our existing load today, and we have plans in place to serve what we foresee to come to Arkansas. The governor, who made this her priority because of what she's hearing and what she's seeing across the country, worked with the Arkansas General Assembly this past legislative session to pass what we call the Arkansas Generating Jobs Act. And from that, we now have the ability to facilitate investments in transmission and generation to ensure that we're balancing both reliability of our system and affordability for our customers. And through that, Entergy Arkansas we've got over 2 gigawatts worth of generation either under construction or in the regulatory approval process waiting to break ground, so that we are prepared for when the supply when the demand comes here to Arkansas. We're obviously already seeing it with the Google project. With that project, we are building a solar and battery facility for which they are paying to help serve their load. And what that does for the rest of customers is it lowers our fuel costs. They're paying for the infrastructure, but the fuel costs of those facilities will help put downward pressure on everybody else's rates. So it's a real win-win with respect to that specific project. But what position we don't want to be in, and which is why we are making these investments and getting out in front of this inflection point, is when we have somebody like Dave Stickler sitting here saying he wants to take that $8 billion and jack it up to $12 billion and build a 4th steel mill. We don't want to be the barrier. We don't want to be the bottleneck. And that is why we are being so proactive in this space, both with contracting for the equipment and putting steel in the ground.
So let's put a little context together too. We talked about the amount of years, decades it takes to plan for roads and bridges. That 2 gigawatts of power, what is the planning process there? How much foresight do you have to have? When does this start? And then to completion, what's the tenure of that?
It depends on the resource need. That some have a shorter construction cycle than others. But the long lead time equipment, the material that I was just talking about, has got to be ordered. The wait times for the major components of transmission, breakers, transformers, and then the generators themselves are years in the queue process. Fortunately, our company has some partners in the industry where we've gotten ahead of that and had some bulk orders that puts us in a really competitive advantage across our system to be ready when those projects are ready to be moved. But you compound both the need for the equipment, the supply chain constraints, the labor market, right? So we're not the only ones building generation right now, and there's only a handful of people that can do it all at the same time. So we're sort of staggering what we're bringing online to ensure that we keep the labor force here in Arkansas and then move it around our sites. But you're talking anywhere from 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, good context there. Okay, Marvin, so we've talked about Northeast Arkansas in the middle of this unique dynamic moment where a lot of significant growth is happening and or around the corner, so to speak. And Infrastructure alone doesn't address all of these challenges. So my thought to you, given that you've done this 40 years, were we just having a 40-year conversation a minute ago, beyond roads and utilities, what other ingredients lead to success? And I put this in context because we can talk about the state spending hundreds of millions of dollars and investing a lot of public money in this, but we've seen this before. We've seen other parts of our state have airports and roads and bridges and rail, and yet not rise up to meet the community growth needs. So I'm curious, as you sort of see this community, in addition to this investment, what do we need to have success locally? What locally needs to be there in order to really see success in the next 5 to 40 years?
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for that. I think I go back to, I grew up in Northwest Arkansas. I was born and raised there, and you're looking at a part of the state that is now, you're seeing what took 40 or 50 years to get to that point. But you've got other cities that have all the pieces and parts in place, but they don't see that kind of that growth, that kind of energy that gets into it. And I think it gets into the quality of life, the style of, and people have got to be enthusiastic about being there. And once it starts to build and grow, and it continues to, it takes on a momentum of its own. And I think it takes this sort of event, this sort of input from all the different stakeholders to really make that happen. And there's no one thing. It can have all the pieces and parts, but if you don't get the people that live there, the people that want to be there, involved and energy put into it, then it's hard to make it happen. So I think that differentiates some parts of the state and some cities from others, just because it's a lot of enthusiasm, but I think the energy you get from that.
So help me speak to this. So Graham Cobb was on the stage a minute ago, has history in Central Arkansas and now Northwest Arkansas, and I was in Northwest Arkansas last weekend, and clearly they've had a lot of forethought. They're trying to address to a dynamic growth situation, and they've invested a lot in infrastructure there. But with all respect, I'm scary driving through that. I mean, it's not enough. And so growth has outpaced even those visionary demands. And you think about housing pressures, like the working members of the community are really pressured on finding housing. And so I'm just trying to think, how do we need to be thinking about locally solving needs? Because once we build the road and we put in the power plant, as the community grows, we have all these other pressures that show up. And
it takes supportive jobs. You've got to have people be able to afford to live there. People that you've got to have the quality of life aspects that they're looking for. And then you've got to be able to build the houses that people can actually put into. And in Northwest Arkansas, they keep moving further and further out. In Northeast Arkansas, you've got little pockets and growth. There's a lot of growth, of course, in Jonesboro, but you get to Paragould and some of the smaller cities about. How do those start to spread? They've gotten up, Northwest Arkansas got to the point where they've all kind of morphed into one. It used to be you go from Fayetteville to Springdale to Rogers, Lowell. It was separate entities. Now it's just one big. I think as that Northeast Arkansas starts to develop, I think you'll start to reach that tipping point where it starts to get a momentum of its own. But you've got to have a place for people to live. They can't drive always 50 miles to go to work and all that.
So then you've seen this over 40 years. I'm curious, what leads to delays, right? So you've seen what can delay a job. What should Northeast Arkansas be looking at now in order to prevent infrastructure projects from stalling once construction begins, or housing projects, or thinking about impacts to schools, or thinking about impacts to sewer systems? So what stalls a project historically?
I think if you've got to have long-range planning that really looks out far enough, and you've got to anticipate what you're expected to have. You're not going to catch everything. You've got to be able to reduce your risks and plan for those risks to try to mitigate them. But once you get you've got to have materials that are available. We've got long lead times on a lot of projects. items that we're getting, supply chain issues, disruptions to that. Materials themselves sometimes are hard to get, but all these things, you've got contractors that they've got to be high quality. You've got to have the funding in place. You've got to have the long-term tax base in order to pay for the bonds that you've had to get. Well, you've got to figure out when to buy your money. Do you buy it now in this tranche, or do you get even more for future work? But you've got to look, as Jerry was talking about, so far out, and Jessie's planning that far out. How do we? You're not going to get it all, but you've got to really think out farther ahead.
So Laura, hear Marvin talk a little bit about how do we de-risk some of this situation while still investing and being visionary along the way. So I'm curious, when a new project considers Northeast Arkansas, when do you get involved, first of all? Because you're at the front of almost every one of these major discussions, as my understanding. So how early do you get involved? And then what steps help de-risk a site that, like for these larger projects that we've seen committing to the region, like Big River Steel and Google and others? So sort of think about both of those layers of question.
Great question. First of all, congratulations to Northeast Arkansas on all the success that we've had to date together. You all have really have the momentum in Northeast Arkansas right now with both the heavy industry and now the technical industry, and so there's a lot of excitement. And yes, we are brought in extremely early in those conversations. We had our good friend Dave Stickler up here earlier, and he talked about Entergy Arkansas bringing that project to fruition. We were in the very forefront of those conversations because electricity was his highest cost. Now the conversation has switched from cost to speed. How much do you have and how fast can you get it to me? And so that's what they want to know when they're making a decision to come to Arkansas is, are they going to, if I want to be up and running in 2 years, can you meet my timeline? And the earlier we are in the conversation, the easier it is to meet their timeline because we can order that long lead time equipment so it's ready and on site when they're ready to turn the dirt. And in the meantime, I'll work everything else out. So that's been a critical component of our success, is being brought in very early so we can, be ready. And then what helps de-risk a site, we have a program at Entergy Arkansas, and it's actually headed by Tandy White, who's making notes over there right now, called Certified Select Sites. And some of you may be familiar with that program, but it's a program that we validate as a third party site readiness for specific projects and then sort of put a stamp of approval on those and then market it as a state. And when we do that, we go through a checklist of things that we know prospective industry is looking for when they want to find a site, and hopefully uncover unknowns and fix them before they become a problem. That helps de-risk it. Also, having that certification saves time, cost, and risk for those prospective customers. So it's a really promising program, and in fact, Big River Steel was a certified site when they came to Arkansas, and we worked with our Osceola partners around here to make that happen. Likewise, Google was not a certified site, but we worked hand in hand with the local leadership to do as much due diligence on the property as we're marketing it to prospective customers, again, to give them the confidence to make the investment more quickly and less risky. So we are continuing to work with our community partners to expand that program. There are only 8 certified sites in Arkansas right now. We need more sites.
So who initiates that? Are these county judges reaching out? Is this chambers of commerce directors? Are they city managers saying,
right.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's get back to money for a second. So let me start with you, Commissioner Halsey. Beyond state and federal dollars, we alluded to this before, so what is the mix that's usually there? What collaborative funding approaches are there, or what, for Northeast Arkansas to thrive, what should there be to provide extra juice for continued development here that could perhaps speed up any Northeast priorities?
My initial thought whenever I became a commissioner was you have to think outside the box. And since I've become a commissioner, I've decided that it's not thinking outside the box, it's communication. Because when I was thinking outside the box and says, hey, we can do this, can we do this? You know, is there something over here? Somebody would say, well, there's already a plan in place. Well, this is already available to you if you wanted to look at it. So what I think we have to do, because it has to be public and it has to be private and it has to be an investment. I mean, we are investing dollars, and whether we are citizens or whether we are industry, if you invest those dollars into that infrastructure, you're going to get a return. There's a return to that. And so what I think we have to do is we have to identify what those needs are, and we have to all go and sit down around the table and say, the industry has to say, these are our needs. And the community leaders have to say, this is how we can help. And as we sit down, then we go and look at all the programs that the people before us have put together and say, which one of these fits what we want to do? And we've got a meeting in the near future with some of those leaders to have those very conversations. And the communication, I mean, I think we have to go get more money, and we have to get our share of it. But we have to identify where it's going to come from. And I think communication and identifying the issues are the big thing to do.
Jessie, what do you see are the most significant sort of non-funding barriers that the state and the local partners must consider to link all these hubs together and make this a success?
So I think one of the biggest things what I've seen is actually the Chancellor talked about earlier, the regionalism is really one voice for the region. When you have your priorities aligned for the region, when you come to ARDOT for proposing a project, that makes it much easier to help for us to deliver. Whereas when there are multiple entities, agencies within the region, everybody has their priority. When they come to us, of course, you know, I know you asked non-funding related, but there's only a finite amount of funding that's available. When there are multiple priorities presented to us, it makes the project very difficult to deliver. Yeah. So that's a very important part. The region should come together and have that vision for the future. I can give you an example about, maybe draw a parallel for you, is I-49, which is in northwest Arkansas. We did a planning study about 20 years ago, and most of those improvements, we're still, I-49 is widening right now, the interchange improvements going on right now. Those are the result of that planning study. Think about that's 20 years ago, right? So, and then I-49 South in Fort Smith, that became high priority corridor number 1, congressionally designated high priority corridor number 1 back in the 90s. So we are, you know, building the river crossing now. So it takes a number of years. Commissioner Halsey talked about I-57, Corning bypass under construction. We have a project building the freeway from Corning to State Line. That's the next, it's funded, but the portion from Walnut Ridge to Corning still unfunded right now. So, but we're doing PE. So those are some major projects, takes time and also takes collaboration with the region. For Jonesboro, we know the big steel industry, one of the biggest, or the biggest steel producing region of the country is happening in Northeast Arkansas. Commissioner Halsey, in collaboration with the local agency, local officials, presented a planning study idea to the commission, and the commission passed a minute order earlier this year to initiate a planning study that's going to study a better connecting Jonesboro and the steel industry area. So that's the 30-year vision that Commissioner Halsey mentioned. It takes early planning, and then if this is major infrastructure initiative for the region, then everybody should pull the resources together, get involved earlier, and then for a major corridor going through multiple counties, multiple cities, how can this vision be translated through your land development within your jurisdiction? That's something all of us can be thinking about.
So just to maybe tie the previous panel to this one, it sounds like one of the non-funding impediments is our either unwillingness to collaborate together across multiple counties. If the idea that Batesville and Paragould and Osceola and Jonesboro, et cetera, all have to be on the same page with these large projects, it's going to be a more effective strategy when we're pooling resources and money. Is that?
Yeah, I think I'm not saying the unwillingness. It's the having the catalyst. This event is a great place to convene those coordination, those conversation. That you got to create those opportunities for everybody to get together. And it's not people are not willing. Are they even aware of this conversations going on? Let's get together and talk about it.
So mobilizing that team, much like Central Arkansas has the Metro Alliance, it was referred to, and West Arkansas famously has the Northwest Council. I think those have been real convening bodies. That makes sense. Mark, we've talked about roads, we've talked about energy. What we haven't talked about is water. And so, Marvin, whereas roads and energy often grab a lot of headlines, there is a lot of conversation around water use and big water consumers, and we're not asking you to out certain companies. We're not asking that, but that idea, what are water supply, water treatment, and wastewater considerations for large users here in Northeast Arkansas? And again, same kind of concept. What's a typical 5 to 10 year expansion path look like for a city system or a private system? So two things there. What's the path for expansion, and sort of what are those considerations for large water consumers here in Northeast Arkansas?
At this point, in this part of the world, source identification is the first thing, and you've got, of course, we've been using the groundwater sources over the years to the point where we've compromised the aquifers if we're not careful, they'll collapse on it, and then they're really in trouble. To that end, a couple of projects that have been in the works for literally decades, core projects. One's the Grand Prairie Water District, taking water out of the White, and then we got the Biomeda project there close to Little Rock and Lone Oak that's taking water out of the Arkansas River and putting that on the farms through open channel flow, and so that the farmers can get off of the groundwater in the aquifer. You come here to this part of the state, that problem still exists, and if you're going to start to bring in to identify and develop a new supply for a large user, you're probably going to be looking at a surface water system. The treatment systems for that are also a 5 to 10 year planning, funding, and construction. And again, who pays for that? Does a Google come in and say, hey, we'll cover that for you? Well, that's quite an investment. And you do a regional water system like they're doing, say, at Benton and Beaver Lake, that you supply several of the towns within. Well, then you're starting to run water lines for miles, and all that begins to add up as far as both cost and materials availability and supply. So there's a lot of cost efficiency by going with large systems, but you still have to. There's a balance between pumping it for 20 miles, and then we looked at taking water out of Lake DeGray in the mid '80s. To bring to Little Rock through a pipeline, and that project's still kind of bouncing around. That water supply is there. It's for them to use. Where do you get that kind of water in this part of the world? We don't have a Lake DeGray sitting here that's just got that kind of capacity. So and those are 5 and 10 year systems, and it's something that everyone just assumes that turn the tap on, there it is. And then you've got the obverse of that is the wastewater systems. You've got to treat the water that you've used. And if you're using cooling systems in a particular plant, that has to be very high quality water. So you've got to treat it well, and then the chemicals you use to that, you've got to take out before you put it back in the environment. So there's a big cycle there that takes time and planning and money.
All right, let's do, this will be a quick hit for each of you. We'll start with you, Miss Laura. There are multiple communities represented in this room, so just sort of give us, if we summed it up into a couple of sort of what would be the top 2 signals Entergy or each of your firms need from a city or a county to move a project from, hey, that's a good idea, to let's go. Can you sort of focus on what that looks like? Or is it local matching dollars, like Jerry mentioned? There's tax funds, local dollars. Is it partially, are you ready sites? Is it some right-of-way option that's there? Something. What sort of looks good to say, yes, that is, go take that from good idea to go, so that these communities can have those things ready to handle?
What we have seen in our experience is site control. So that means either you own the land that you want to market, or you've got an option on it, because you can't represent an opportunity to somebody if you don't have any control over that opportunity. So that has been a defining factor in projects that come to Arkansas and don't come to Arkansas. And so I highly encourage the local communities to work together with their economic development teams, with the site selection process, to try and put together tracks that you've got control over and can actively market. And then once you actively market them, you pair that with doing the right due diligence so that you are removing the barriers that we talked about earlier for those prospective customers, gets you to go, right?
Makes sense. Jessie, same thing, sort of, there's 1 or 2 things you would point to that a community needs to sort of undertake to get to move from, hey, that's a good idea, to we're going to do that.
I would recommend that if you have a great idea, first making sure the region comes together and present the idea. Also get ARDOT involved early, the Highway Commissioner and the ARDOT involved early, so we can vet it through. An idea, a perceived problem may not necessarily the root of the problem. So how do you solve that problem really takes some analysis to do, to determine. So, and then the recommended improvements, is that going to be really solve that problem? So that's how we looked at it. So get ARDOT involved early so we can evaluate and possibly present some options for you that's even a better solution. That's one thing. And I do want to take the opportunity now to talk a little bit about, under the Highway Commission's guidance, excuse me, we have set aside $5 million per year in our statewide transportation improvement program for projects that helps economic development, that for highway projects. The other thing is we also have a program, we set aside $25 million a year for partnering. And partnering, I saw County Judge and Judge Dave was here, and then also I see Mayor from Mountain Home. Both those entities, even City of Jonesboro, have taken advantage of that program. The city or the county bring some money to the table, or even willing to take some highways off the state highway system to partner with ARDOT. That helps advancing projects much quicker. I just give you one example. Northeast Arkansas, Cherokee County, and City of Jonesboro brought about $14 million to the table, and then be able to leverage in projects up to like over $200 million. And this partnering program started back in the 90s, and overall program, it's about 170 projects, and total funding that come from the local governments was less than $900 million. But that funding was able to be used to leverage over $4 billion in project delivery. So that's a very successful program, and we brag about it nationally, so be thinking about that as well.
Yeah, interesting. Commissioner, you have an interesting role here. You've been involved in community development professionally for years, both here and across the state, but now as a commissioner, so think of this answer maybe in both ways, but what are 1 or 2 things a community needs to have accomplished to get something to go from, hey, that's a good idea, to we're going to do that?
Well, I agree with both of them. I think you have to have control, and you have to have community buy-in, and you have to have the due diligence already completed. You need to be, and I think most cities, counties, and regions have those projects that they say, hey, the surveying has been done, the right-of-way has been secured, we have options. I think they have those things in place. But the one thing I keep going back to, everyone has to agree. Everyone has to say, because when shovel-ready happens, usually it's ready for it right then, and if you have people saying, no, I want this, no, I want this, it goes somewhere else. And I can't say enough, you've got to sit down around a table, you got to have communication, and you've all got to agree to go a certain way. And we are Northeast Arkansas. We are no longer Jonesboro, Paragould, Osceola, Pocahontas, Mountain Home. I mean, we are Northeast Arkansas, and we have to grow. And and somebody said up here earlier, when one of us wins, we all win, period.
And Marvin, same with you. From this engineering side, what would you say is what needs to be ready? What are the things that are critical to move something from idea to go?
I think it's that you've done your planning, you've looked out, you can always spend some money on something that takes care of a problem today, but if you're going to spend those kind of funds, which are not unlimited, have you thought about how that helps you 5 or 10 years down the road? Does it parlay that you've spent into something that you've got a longer range plan for to tie back into? And so you don't waste that energy, because if you get everybody to communicate and everybody's pulling the same direction, and then 5 years later they say, well, we just did this, why didn't we think about that? Then it's a little harder to get them enthused about pulling on that same direction the next time. So always, I think you've got to make sure that the city or the entity has done their homework, basically. If you haven't looked far enough out to make sure that you're spending it wisely now as phase one of something, then you're just making it that much harder on yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, I want to circle back on something you mentioned earlier about reliable transmission, and I'm curious if you can kind of identify where Entergy is on its sort of investment in the transmission and distribution to sort of improve that. Nobody thought twice when they hit the light switch in this room that the lights would come on, right? We take this so for granted.
And that is not because Jonesboro has a municipality.
Yeah, but that idea, we think about reliability. We take this for granted where many parts of the world don't have this reliability. So as we think about infrastructure and how that affects reliability, both in transmission and distribution, not just the creation of, you can talk about the creation of, but these other pieces, sort of where is Entergy there and what's being sort of invested in to ensure reliability?
That's a great question, and it's really an exciting time. I think it was the entrepreneurship panel, and maybe even you, Heather, that said every company should have an entrepreneurial mindset within that company. And I take that and say, and an innovation mindset. Those are two words that you typically don't associate with an electric utility, right? We've been around for 100 years. We've been doing it the same way for 100 years. That is about to change. And at Entergy Arkansas, we are undertaking a comprehensive grid reliability undertaking right now, because we have tools that we haven't had historically, technology advancements, better materials. So we're going to start just with the vegetation piece of it, the Mother Nature, the tree fall on the line that Stickler's talking about. We can now bring in AI, we can bring in satellite imagery, we can better target our vegetation management dollars to hit the hot spots instead of just trimming a line whether it needs it or not, right? The other thing we're doing, at least on the transmission side, is now we have what's called an air saw. This is really fascinating, but we now, for the areas that we can't get to, or hard to reach areas, so to speak, take the helicopter and have what is an air saw that just goes right down the transmission line and slices that vegetation where it won't fall on those transmission lines in the extreme weather events that we've seen so much more frequently. We're doing the same thing on the distribution side with respect to advanced distribution materials. We now have self-healing networks. We have composite poles that are stronger and more resilient. And we have the ability to do remote sensors and monitoring of our system. All of this together together will both reduce the frequency and the duration of outages, and we're really excited about what it's going to produce for our customers.
Yeah, I appreciate you circling back there. Okay, we're winding down here with a couple of last things. Let's start with, we didn't celebrate this at the beginning, but there are two A-State grads on this panel, first of all. So let's talk a second about A-State, since they're our host and what we're doing here, and they're preparing this sort of workforce and vision and convening. I'm curious, we'll start with you, Ms. Jones. What do you need from Arkansas State University in the next 1 to 3 years? And maybe what's A-State doing well? And I think they would particularly like to hear maybe what they're not doing well. What do we need to improve on in order to have better collaboration between industry and education?
Well, thank you for that question. So I really enjoyed my time here at A-State quite a few years ago. What do we need from A-State? I want to say, A-State is not only an educational institution, but it's also a research institution. We got to take advantage of that. Workforce development, very important part. We got to have people. And then also innovation, research and innovation. I was just looking that up, A-State has done research project for ARDOT, making better materials, for more durable material, better process for concrete and asphalt. So we want to take advantage of that. So we look at you guys to help us to make process better for us. That's what I think, technology-wise, we could utilize A-State's expertise to help us with that, and then also workforce development. We need more engineers, and Commissioner Halsey is going to say accountants as well.
All right, Commissioner Halsey, here you go. That's, what would you say, what can A-State, what is it doing well, but what also in the next 2 or 3 years can it be focused on to make an impact between industry, state, regional collaboration?
Well, first of all, I want to say Dr. Todd Shields and his team is doing an outstanding job. And it seems like they are clicking on all cylinders. And it doesn't matter if it's day, night, he's up and working. So I think we need to be proud of him and thank him for that. We do need workforce, and I do believe he has a plan, and his team has a plan put in place to go to every workforce industry, whatever the industry is. If the industry needs a workforce, he is there to say, here's a plan, and here's how we can make it work. And I think we need engineers, and we need accountants. That's what I hear from all of my peers. They need engineers and accountants, and I think that's what they do, is to produce those. I'm not in the room to tell you what they're doing wrong, because I see mostly what they're doing right, and what they're doing, even if they're at least planning and saying this is where we're going and charting a path for us to get there.
Yeah. All right, Marvin and Laura, you get the same question, and you have a different context here. Do you say they need more engineers? I bet you also
Absolutely.
say that.
We are always trying to find quality folks that have got both experience and some training and there's, with the industries that you've got here, the internships that they have either internal to their particular facility or through the university are key, because when you go to hire folks, we're looking for someone that's already got a pretty good idea what real world engineering looks like, as opposed to what you might have thought it was going to be. And we big into the internships, the on-the-job training where they work in an industry for a while, and then before they come into the office, or vice versa. And I think that the other thing is you've got these great research facilities here in NCA or ACED, and then you've got, you start to do the materials testing for steel here. You've got the CREC labs up at U of A. These research facilities need to be, we're not like the triangle with Duke and North Carolina and all that, where the research triangle there. We've got a state that's about that same size as that triangle. We should be trying to synergistically have these guys, instead of, well, this is our stuff and that's your stuff, they need to be cross-collaborating, because that parlays that research capability into a much greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that's really what they're doing well here, and I think that as they increase their visibility and communications, you're back to that. There's a lot of this that the industries may not be aware of is here, and do they know that? Are they aware of this? And those guys that are in it this close, they are. But other folks that maybe ancillary industries that could be here if they knew that was an option.
Good context. Ms. Laura, what would you say that ASU should be focusing on to further help what you need, but also the collaboration between industry and government?
Perfect. Just to follow up real quick on the research piece of it, I want to give a shout out to my friends at Arkansas Research Alliance that are trying to facilitate that sharing of research opportunities among their university partners. So, but it's more work to be done there. On the A-State piece of the puzzle, one of the greatest tools we have is the partnership between our higher education facilities and industry. And you're seeing that success play out when you think about what A-State has done with the Center for Advanced Materials and Steel Manufacturing, and really bridging the classroom, the lab, to the plant floor, and creating a pipeline of workforce to give that industry confidence that they can continue to grow in Arkansas, right? And maintain and then accelerate the steelmaking capital of the world in Mississippi County. That can be further replicated. We were just talking about at our table at lunch how we can replicate that with the tech industry that's now moving into Northeast Arkansas. And so A-State has a role, a leadership role in really driving the workforce that will put Northeast Arkansas not just in the conversation about growing the economy in Arkansas, but leading it.
Well, thank you for providing a charge to the communities that are represented here and some clarity on what's needed from each of us to continue to go forward. How about a hand for our panelists? We'll bring back Heather Nelson to give us some closing words. So
this looks like chicken scratch now. So the chancellor has been texting me things throughout, ideas that are coming up as we're listening to the panelists. But I do want to say a word of thanks and point out some things for all of you. First, thank you so much for spending your day with Arkansas State University. Your time is very valuable, and we know that. And it means so much that so many of you chose to be here and that are represented from across the great state of Arkansas. That just means so much to all of us. And that you're listening, that you're sharing, and you're thinking about how do we grow Northeast Arkansas together. So today we made the case for acting as one region. The conversation with Chancellor Todd Shields and Graham Cobb showed how communities, campuses, and companies can pull in the same direction and even move faster. And we're already seeing this from our last catalyst, so I'm going off script. Chris will be upset with me, but we issued this challenge at the last catalyst. We had 4 slates of panelists up here, and we've had industry and panelists go back to their company and come to the chancellor and come to the provost and to their teams and say, how can we collaborate? And one is represented today, Nucor Steel, Nucor. So there are lots of discussions that have happened since January when Zach Moon was one of our panelists. That's heavy expectations for all the panelists. We want to work with you. But there's been so many conversations that have come since the catalyst in January. We're so appreciative of that. There might be news about steel and baseball. I don't know. I don't think I'm supposed to be able to talk about that. Zach's grinning, so maybe I'm okay. My job's at risk automatically. So, but today we also heard plans for the backbone of growth, power, roads, sites, and housing. Because that's what we know the employers want and need in order so that they will grow in this area in confidence. On campus, we announced the entrepreneurship degree, Go Entrepreneurship, to give students and operators a clear path from classroom to company. Every organization needs entrepreneurial thinkers. I'll slip you that 20, Laura, later for talking about entrepreneurial mindset. Thank you. And in agriculture, producers, the A-State College of Agriculture and the state of Arkansas are working more closely, using new tools, sharing know-how, and solving problems together so that more value stays here at home. So here's the challenge. If something you heard today sparked an idea, first, you can grab any of us here, especially if anybody has an A-State tag on, but also you can email those ideas to us. We have one central email address at catalyst@astate.edu. So if you don't know who exactly to ask for, send that an email. It will get to the right person. You may end up getting a direct call right from the chancellor. And also, we're so excited. This was really a proof of concept in January when we did the first one. We had no idea if anybody would show up, and then Mother Nature got drunk and sent a winter storm, and we still had 600 people show up in January. We were blown away, and we hoped maybe, because it's a shortened cycle of 10 months, we hoped we might have 600 again, and over 620 at last count. With the line out the door, I just gave up. So well over 600 are here today, and that tells us that these convenings need to happen and we need to do more of them. The chancellor has committed to that, and now going forward, the first Thursday of every November will be the Catalyst Forum here at Arkansas State University. So you can go ahead and put it on your calendar for November 5th, 2026 will be our next one. Everybody gets 12 months. Yay for the Catalyst team. The Catalyst team wants 12 months before the next one. So we're so thrilled that you are all here today. We hope that you're leaving with ideas and energy. You feel challenged. You feel inspired. We hope you've made connections. We stress it to the students all the time. We hope that each one of you had a student that you did not know come up to you and shake your hand and introduce themselves. But we know that connection and collaboration and communication and curiosity are important, and those are the hallmarks here at Arkansas State University. And so thank you so much for being here today. Safe travels home, and we'll see you next year.